So he has to flee Poland. He goes to Dresden, then he goes to Paris. In Paris, he learns about the battles of Lexington and Concord, and the American Revolution about to start. So he sets sail for Philadelphia. He arrives in Philadelphia in August of 1776, a month after the signing of the Declaration of Independence. And he walks into the office of the only American he's ever heard of, Benjamin Franklin. He introduces himself and says, "My name is Kosciuszko. I'm here, I'm a trained officer. I'm here to take your test for military engineering to join the Continental Army." Ben Franklin looks at him like he's from Mars and says, "We're a country of farmers and merchants, and we don't really have an army, much less a test for, what is it, military? We don't have a test like that." So he says, "I tell you what, we do have a guy who knows a lot about geometry. So come back and we'll give you a geometry test." Comes back, Kosciuszko aces the geometry test, and Ben Franklin says, "Great, you're in charge of building forts." So Kosciuszko starts designing forts on the banks of the Delaware River in the approach to the harbor. Because the Americans know that the British are planning on sailing into the Delaware and shooting at the rebel capital. So Kosciuszko builds forts Mercer's and Billingsport on the banks of the river, and then he does something that's ingenious. In Paris, he learned how to build a chevaux de frise, which is basically a log that's sharpened at the end, and then they would bang iron onto the tips of these logs and put them in crates and build these crates and submerge them underwater with these iron tips up, so when the British ships would sail into the harbor, it would puncture holes into the bottom. Suddenly the Americans realized, so that's what a military engineer does. We need more of these guys. So Ben Franklin sails for Paris to get more military engineers. Now all of the American officers want Kosciuszko to work for them. George Washington wants him to work for him. But because Kosciuszko didn't know how to speak English at this point, they all think he's French. So they all said, "We want that French guy to work for us." And Washington doesn't get him. The first person to get him is General Horatio Gates. General Horatio Gates was the commander of the Northern Army. And he becomes friends with Kosciuszko and says, "I need you to go up to New York State, up to a spot called Fort Ticonderoga, and see if this fort is going to withstand attack from the British. The British are planning on coming down from Canada. Go up there and see if this fort will hold." So Kosciuszko gets up to the fort. He says, "It's a fantastic fort, but you have this little hill over here. And if the British put cannons on that hill and shoot down at us, we'll be dead ducks." Well, the Americans say, "This hill is too steep. We'll never get cannons up there." So sure enough, the British march down. General Phillips tells his soldiers, "Put cannons up on that hill." And they start complaining, just like the Americans. General Phillips says, "Listen, a goat can get up there. And where a goat can go, a man can go. And where a man can go, he can haul up a gun. So put cannons up there." So they drag cannons up there. And on July 4th, 1777, the Americans wake up, are happy. It's an anniversary of the Declaration of Independence. But they see these little red coats dancing on this hill, firing cannonballs down into the fort. That's it. They had to retreat, otherwise they'd be dead. So they retreat, and they start going down the Hudson River, and they put Kosciuszko in charge of covering the rear. And Kosciuszko takes trees and chops them down, puts them over roads. And then he takes streams and reroutes them by moving boulders to flood those roads. The British needed these roads to move their cannons, to drag their cattle and their carriages that are carrying their guns and their luggage. So by doing this, it took the British 22 days to travel 20 miles. In the meantime, the American army escapes, thanks to Kosciuszko. So Kosciuszko rides up now, catches up to the army to see where they are, and they're setting up along the river at a place called Stillwater. Kosciuszko rides up on his horse and says, "What are you doing? You can't." Again, the low ground. See that hill over there? From that hill, the British can shoot the buckles off your shoes. We need to find a hill. And the colonels are all afraid, saying, "But General Gates told us to set up here." So Kosciuszko rides up and says, "Don't worry, I'll deal with Gates." He goes and tells Gates that we need to cover the high ground. Kosciuszko had studied the Battle of Thermopylae, and he realized that we need to create a bottleneck where they have to be forced through. So he goes further down the Hudson, and he finds a spot called Bemis Heights. And Bemis Heights was along the Hudson River near a place called Saratoga. And these are Kosciuszko's plans for that battle. He knows that the British will be marching down along the Hudson River, Here you see the B, which were the British troops. And here you see the A, which were the American troops. And here you see Kosciuszko's signature on this, the battle plan. And he knew that the British would not be able to flank the Americans to the east because of the deep Hudson River, or to the west because of thick forest. So he forced the British to march up the hill at the American position. And because of this, the Americans won the Battle of Saratoga. This was the turning point of the American Revolution. Up until now, the Americans had not won any battles. At this battle, they captured 5,000 British soldiers. Now, American historians have given credit to this battle, to the victory of this battle, to this man, Benedict Arnold. Benedict Arnold was at this battle, and he rode down the hill on his white horse. He had it shot out from under him and did all these dramatic things. But I found a bunch of memoirs of 4 different colonels that were at this battle. People who were there said, no, we won this battle because of Kosciuszko. And in fact, General Gates, who was the commander of the army, also says that because of the position of the hills and forests chosen by my young Polish engineer, we won this battle. So American historians have completely overlooked Kosciuszko's role in this battle, while people who were there clearly point to his plan as the key for the victory. So Kosciuszko now emerges as the best military engineer that the Americans have. And George Washington realizes what the British are trying to do. They're trying to capture the Hudson River because they know that the revolution started in Massachusetts and the New England states, and it's spreading down south. So the British figured, if we capture the Hudson River and cut the Americans off in New England, it won't spread to the south. So George Washington says we need to protect the Hudson River at all costs. And they find a spot. Back then, they called it the North River before it was changed to the Hudson River. They find a spot called West Point. And West Point, as you see here, has a bend in the river. And they knew that the British, if they wanted to sail through here, they would have to slow down to tack and change their sails. So they put a chain across the river so that the British would not be able to pass. They wouldn't be able to speed through and break the chain because of this turn. So they decided they're going to build a fort right above the chain and put cannons there to shoot down on any British ships that sail past West Point. Well, Kosciuszko once again realizes that there are hills in the background and says we need to put cannons up there as well. And by now, French engineers start arriving in America because Ben Franklin, who went to Paris to get more of these engineers, talked the king into joining the Americans after the Battle of Saratoga. The French king thought maybe these Americans can win. So he sends money and guns and engineers. And the French engineers say, no, no, no. Those hills are out of range. There's no way that they'll put cannons up there. There's no way that they'll be able to reach us even if they do. So this you see is a piece of the chain that's at West Point today. It's still there. This is the chain that was stretched across the Hudson. So Kosciuszko was constantly telling them, you need to put guns on all of these hills because the same thing will happen at Fort Ticonderoga. That happened at Fort Ticonderoga will happen here. Now while Kosciuszko is at West Point, he becomes friends with a General Patterson, who had a black man working for him named Agrippa Hull. Agrippa Hull was Patterson's aide-de-camp, but Kosciuszko and Grippy, as everybody called him, become good friends. And Grippy used to tell everybody that, you know, my father was a prince from Africa. So Kosciuszko and he becomes so close that General Patterson says, all right, Grippy, from now on, you work for Kosciuszko, you're going to be his aide-de-camp from now on. So the two become friends, and they build a log cabin together at West Point, which becomes their quarters.